As part of a series that we've been doing now called Behind Closed Doors, we want to share those kind of 1-line, 2-line, 3-line things that we hear every day from great founders and limited partners that get us to change our thinking and evolve. And when we met, you said, I think a couple times, put points on the board, which I think is a phrase that a lot of us kind of generally understand what it means. And I walked away from our conversation thinking, I have to believe you have a slightly different version of what that means to you, because you've been, I think by all accounts, incredibly successful in a number of different roles and financial roles and in operating roles. But I'd love to understand what exactly it is that drives you, because you've walked away from certain positions that could have been lifelong careers to go do something else. And you had talked about doing that because you wanted to put points on the board. So
Yeah.
I'll leave it to you to kind of explain what that means to you, because I think it could help people listening to understand, what drives a person, an individual such as yourself.
Yeah, no, and Wills, it was obviously great catching up with you and hearing about your progress in the fund and everything you've done too. So appreciate it. I think so. Two-part question, I guess. Points on the board, and then what drives me. I think what drives me ultimately is probably a lot of my values, and I think a lot of that probably comes down to curiosity and growth and learning. And I think when I think about sort of points on the board, I think there's a lot to be said about talking about what you're going to do, but I do think results speak for themselves. And I think when you want to think about points on the board, I think it does a couple of things. One, I think it inspires internally, like your team, right? Your counterparts. I think there's a lot to building a company like it, honestly, like a sports team. So everyone gets motivated. Everyone starts to believe, internally a bit more when there's points on the board. And, I think everyone then is also willing to sacrifice. I think a lot of it is, certain people internally may have a view of how they want to do things, sort of like their, what may be best in their minds. And, there's a million ways to figure things out and to operate and to execute. And so I think a lot of times points on the board also lets everyone sort of realize wait, this is for the team. And that we all need to work together. And if we work more well together, right, we're going to be able to do that. So I think the other thing it does, that's internally. I think externally, honestly, companies I think are really made on momentum. I think, I heard something once that described to me was your company doesn't need to exist. In the case of Oura, tiny competitor making a wearable focus on sleep. No one cared about sleep. No one was tracking sleep at the time, right? Also a ring. No one really was focused on a ring form factor for wearable. So it's Apple, Fitbit, Samsung, Garmin, all these other bigger companies are out there sort of pushing a different narrative. And so in one sense, your company really doesn't need to exist. Customers, you have competitors who are trying to out innovate you, right? They have customers of your potential customer of yours, they're trying to take away. And so I think when you put points on the board, you start to build momentum. And I really think, momentum is a thing that sort of compounds or snowballs, however you want to put it. And I think both those things really are ultimately what lead to crucible moments. And so I think for me, it was both those that expression, putting points on the board, rallies the troops internally, sort of makes everyone believe, everyone's willing to sacrifice a bit more, everyone's willing to listen a bit more, and then to everyone, frankly, because that's something that's done together. And then I also think externally, it's customers start to believe more. The more something gets out there, the more people adopt it, the more and more that builds. And so I really think those are how I think about putting points on the board, both rallying people internally and then also externally.
I love this. My business partner, Andy, always talks about how the world survived perfectly fine without any of the startups that we've invested in. And, that they're only ultimately successful if they're able to change consumer behavior. Because again, the sun went down and the sun came back up, and we all lived, to your point, without Oura. And, yet through momentum and sacrifice and a couple other things that you mentioned here, you've made it something that, is a going concern. So I love this concept. Really appreciate you sharing all this.
Yeah, no worries at all. And obviously, I think there's a whole team, right? That's the thing. The team starts to believe, and it's incredible what even just a few people, let alone when you have tens or hundreds of people, focused on something, right, that all believe, and everyone wants to put points up on the board. It's amazing what a team can do. I think oftentimes it's like a team environment that brings the best out in everyone and pushes yourself even a little bit more. So that can be honestly the most fun part.
Awesome. Well, hey, really appreciate you carving out some time on this week between Christmas and New Year's, and look forward to seeing you a lot more in 2023.
Likewise.